Welcome back. This is episode number 56 of Kalibrated with Scott. I'm Scott, of course. I appreciate you guys joining me yet again today. If you wouldn't mind liking, subscribing, and if you can, share the video. The way I get around on the YouTube algorithm is by your guys' engagement. So if you like the message that I'm sending here, you like what I'm talking about, if you think I'm presenting arguments based around facts and logic, please comment and like, and just it helps me get to more eyes on YouTube. So I really appreciate you all. And without further ado, let's get right into it because we have a good amount to talk about. I have been away from making videos for about 4 days. In-laws were in town and I was super busy. So I'm back now. I'm glad to be back. I'd much rather be talking about this stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and just start with the counteroffensive. What's going on in the counteroffensive and how Ukraine is managing. We have just arrived at D+40, so we are 40 days into the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Nothing's happening. Still, nothing is happening. We have seen on D+39, which was, I guess, technically yesterday for Ukraine, still today for me. We saw them go on the assault in multiple locations in Bakhmut, on the Bakhmut front, on the Avdiivka front, on the Zaporozhye front, and the southern Donetsk front. And the Ukrainians were repulsed on all of those fronts. They took heavy losses around Robotny again. There's just nothing is going according to plan, and it's getting worse and worse as the days go on. The losses are still mounting. Ukraine is still firing a very high number of shells for their offensive actions and not, achieving any results with that. So I'm going to go ahead and say that the first phase of this Ukrainian counteroffensive and probably the Ukrainian counteroffensive in totality has completely failed. We're just seeing no real strategy, no real objectives being met, and they're just burning and burning and burning through manpower and material. It's really not going good. And in fact, in a lot of the areas of the front, the Russians have gone on the offensive and seem to have the initiative. In the Torske area and in the Shibyansky forestry north of Seversk, the Russians are pressing quite hard. They are gaining kilometers of territory a day in this area. They've actually entered the town of Toretsk, and now there's fighting in this town. If anybody remembers, this was the area that was lost during the Liman push. So now the Russians are actively taking back territory that the Ukrainians captured during the Kharkov-Kherson offensive time period. And this is significant because if Torsk falls and the whole forestry north of Seversk is captured by the Russians, Seversk is back on the menu for the Russians. And we have seen this play out around Sporny, which is a small town on the eastern flank of the Seversk bubble. And I'll post a picture here. And as you can see, it looks like Sporny is going to be captured very soon. The Russians have control over the northern and the southern flank of this settlement. So this is a pretty serious situation for the Ukrainians, because if you actually look behind these frontline towns, there's not a lot in the area behind them to actually defend from a Russian push, and this could really flower out into a much larger operation. And if the Seversk front is captured, that means that Kramatorsk and Slavyansk are going to be in a very precarious situation. We'd probably see a Russian push towards Izium and then down towards Kramatorsk, while pressure is still being put on Chasiv Yar and Konstantinivka and places like that. So there's a lot. There's a switch, really. The Russians now appear to have the initiative on almost all sections of the front. They are also making progress in Zaporozhye, where they have returned all of the Ukrainian progress around Robotny, which was like maybe a kilometer, and they've actually gained a foothold in some fortifications around Golyai-Polye, which is on the Zaporozhye front as well. And around the town of, let me look here, Novovasilivka. So that's up in the Kharkov LPR area, right up against the Oskol River. And this is another area where if the Ukrainians lose their heavily fortified positions, there's not really a lot behind it. Remember, the Ukrainians did not fortify any of the areas that they captured through the Kherson or Kharkov offensives. They haven't had the resources to do it, and they haven't really had the incentive to do it because the Russians haven't been pushing in this area, and the Russians were looking incredibly weak at this time. So that means that a lot of the gains that the Ukrainians achieved through the Kharkov offensive could be reversed relatively quickly just due to the lack of defense structure behind them. But, you know, the Ukrainian offensive is still underway. So we could see progress over the next couple of days in the Zaporozhye area, but I'm not seeing any possibility of that happening. It just really has not panned out. This whole offensive has not panned out the way that the West wanted to. You can see it in the way that they're describing the situation, the way the mainstream media narrative has switched on this Ukrainian counteroffensive. Things are just not going good. And speaking of things not going according to plan, the next topic of discussion is the NATO summit. Ukraine and Zelensky were very, very hopeful that there would be some concrete steps to NATO membership given to Ukraine, and that the Ukrainian state would be more at the focus of this NATO summit, and it just wasn't. Zelensky made some pretty pretty, I don't know how you would say it, going against his normal style comments, where he basically was sort of accusatory that the alliance wasn't doing enough for Ukraine in a proper amount of time. And the whole alliance basically came and spanked him on the butt. And he went and on his nightly address, he apologized to the NATO alliance 47 times in 8 minutes. So that pretty much tells you what's going on, who's making the decisions, and who has any say in what's going on. And it's not Zelensky. So the NATO summit was, in fact, a Sweden party. Sweden has officially joined the alliance, and everybody's celebrating that. And I don't know why. It doesn't make much sense to me. Sweden has had an alliance with NATO for a long time. They are de facto NATO. They've been de facto NATO for over a year. They were accepted by every single nation besides Turkey. And now Turkey has said, okay, they can join. So, I mean, it's really something that should have happened a year ago, when kind of more around the time when Finland joined. But that didn't end up happening, and it just doesn't change anything. If World War III were to break out tomorrow, Finland and Sweden would both instantly ally with NATO, even if they weren't a part of NATO. It's just their armies are already NATO standard. They have agreements with NATO. It's so easy for them to just fit in. So that doesn't change anything. One of the talking points that I've heard from this is that that now NATO can position Russian missiles on the Russian border and threaten places like St. Petersburg or Murmansk. And that's just a ridiculous sentiment, because if anybody can look at a map, and I'll present one right here, Russia already shares a border with Norway, a NATO state, up here at the top, and Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania right here. And that is pretty close to St. Petersburg. So there could be missiles positioned along Russia's border already. It is a ridiculous an attempt at a cope at making Sweden's and Finland's joining of NATO a much bigger deal than it actually is. If you look at what the Russians have talked about, they said that they were already basically planning for Finland to join. Finland was always, it actually simplifies their military planning now, because you don't have to work around Finland. You can just work through Finland if you need to. So it's just not what they're making it out to be. And that's okay. They need a win right now. And when I say they, I mean the pro-Ukrainian crowd who, harasses anybody who doesn't think the way that they do. So they've been aggressive lately, and this is something that was just a distraction from what's going on in Ukraine. It's just the little party for NATO. If you look at the pictures, everybody looks like they're patting each other on the back, and then Zelensky's standing all alone. And I could not think of a better analogy or symbolism for what this NATO summit meant and how the NATO alliance works. It's a bunch of posh idiots, all a bunch of lawyers and just politicians, career politicians that have all come together, and they think that they're doing some amazing work, and they're all patting each other on the back. It's pretty it's just very telling. You're losing a proxy war right now, and they know it. They know it. They know how they know what the ammunition situation that is. They know what the financial situation is. They know they're losing, but they're still trying to put on this facade of NATO unity and NATO strength, and it's just not working out. We did get some pledges from the West. Germany is going to donate 25 Leopard 1A5s. So these are not advanced 2A6s. These are not advanced, even like less advanced, but still advanced 2A4s. These are 1A5s. 1A5s are basically Panther 2s, which is funny to say, like a World War II German Panther. These tanks are from the 1950s or early 60s, and they're just not suited for this kind of combat. They're going to get hit by an FPV drone or a Lancet, and they're just going to cook off. It's just not the appropriate weapon system for the battlefield, but they have nothing else to send. So this is going to be one of their pledge. And it fires a 105 millimeter shell. So you're also now providing a new type of ammo, and it's just another logistics line. It's a mess. Ukraine will also be receiving 27 vehicle recovery vehicles to tow vehicles out of combat situations, which is once again telling of how the counteroffensive is going, that the Ukrainians are in the middle of their counteroffensive, are being, requesting, and they are donating these recovery vehicles to Ukraine. It's not a good sign. It does not bode well for the Ukrainians or the West. They're also receiving 2 Patriot missile launchers, like the actual launch systems, not the radars, and it's not a full battery. It's just 2 launchers. I'm not going to make any speculation on why it's 2. I don't know if you remember what the Russian MOD had claimed about their Kinzhals. They said they had fired 2 Kinzhal hypersonic cruise missiles on Kiev, and they had destroyed 2 Ukrainian launchers. It's just interesting, but it doesn't really necessarily mean anything. I would like to remind everybody that Patriot missile systems can get worn out. Launchers especially, you're firing missiles out of them all day. They need to be replaced and updated and maintained. So this could just be that, but who knows? But it's interesting that it's only 2 launchers, which seem like replacements, and not a full battery from somewhere, which is what the Ukrainians really need, is additional air defense, not just 2 extra launchers. They are also receiving 2 NASM radar stations, which once again, you're receiving a NASM radar station without launchers or the command vehicle or, any of that. So they're not receiving full batteries of air defenses, which is what they really require. They're having a horrific time with dealing with, helicopters and aviation on the front line in Zaporozhye in particular, and they have no means of bringing down these Ka-52s at over 10 kilometers. Stingers won't reach them, but the ATGMs on the Ka-52s reach the Ukrainians with the Stingers. So it's a major problem. Short range air defense is lacking. Long range air defense is all covering important strategic positions in the rear, and they just have no air cover for this offensive. So 2 more NASM radars, which I once again have to assume are covering for losses. And really, that's about it. France decided to donate longer range Storm Shadow cruise missiles, which really doesn't change much for the Russians. The only thing it does is forces the Russians to further progress into Ukraine, to deny the Ukrainians the ability to use these long-range weapon systems on like Moscow or any part of Russia proper. And I know all of these places will become Russia proper, but the new territory that you consider Ukrainian, or you considered Ukrainian like a couple of years ago, is not as fundamentally important to the Russian state as the peaceful areas of Russia proper. So, once again, we have rhetoric coming out from the Kremlin saying this is just a mistake by France. You're going to be labeled an even more unfriendly country. And this continuation of escalation will have consequences on Ukraine. And that sucks. That just sucks for Ukraine. It doesn't really, add up to a positive, a net positive for Ukraine, because they're not receiving enough of these to, cause significant change on the battlefield. And it is what it is. It's desperation. And to continue that desperation, at the NATO summit, one of the big talking points from people who really don't understand what's going on is this idea that there will be a NATO lake. This was a meme. It means that the Northern Sea, the exit for Kaliningrad to the Atlantic Ocean and from St. Petersburg is now closed, kind of, I guess. I don't really know how this makes any sense. There's something called the Freedom of Navigation Act. Ships have to be able to travel through international waters unobstructed. If they are obstructed, this is World War III. This is what they were threatening with a blockade of Kaliningrad. And it just doesn't work out. So the whole NATO lake thing, it is technically a NATO lake. They control the in and out, but if you do anything with it and try to control it and control the Russians within it, it's World War III. So are you going to risk nukes to control a shipping lane? Not really, right? It doesn't make much sense. There's really no benefit to this NATO lake outside of a wartime scenario. And in a wartime scenario between NATO and Russia, the calculus is just nukes. So your Navy doesn't matter, your shipping doesn't matter at that point. It's just over. And a continuation of desperation when it comes to munitions deliveries is the announcement that cluster munitions have been delivered to Ukraine. I believe that they've been here for a little while. Usually this stuff gets delivered before they even announce it, or it's in transit before they even announce it. I know I talked about cluster munitions in the last episode. I don't know if I gave the number. The West is donating 100,000 cluster munition rounds, which, if you do the math on that, if the Ukrainians are firing 10,000 shells a day, which I think is probably a little low, this works out to 10 days of ammunition. Now, this doesn't mean that all of this ammunition is going to be fired in 10 days. They're not just going to start firing these rounds off. They could, but I doubt it. They're going to be used the way that they should be used, on soft targets and appropriate spaces. But the idea that they were presenting was that cluster munitions were supposed to bridge the gap between the U.S. supply shortfalls and what Ukraine needed now. So these weapons are supposed to supplement Ukraine's ammunition expenditure until the United States gets up to par on their ammunition production, or the EU does. And that's just not going to happen. 100,000 rounds is probably the first donation. The U.S. has about 3 million of these rounds in storage. I imagine 500,000 can be sent max. That is not very much ammunition. That would be 50 days of ammunition. And, it is replacing HE artillery shells, which HE does a lot more damage for the most part, especially to fortified locations when you're on the offensive, like the Russians are sitting in, than cluster munitions do. If you're under any sort of cover, cluster munitions are highly ineffective. They're really good against exposed targets and exposed vehicles, but against trench lines, they're rather ineffective. So we'll see how that plays out, but it's not a lot of ammunition, and it's just, I don't know. It's just not what the Ukrainians wanted. If the Ukrainians could choose between 100,000 rounds of cluster munitions or 100,000 rounds of HE, they're going to choose HE all day, because that's what they've been using successfully to keep the Russians back and to try to go on these offensive operations, which aren't working out. But that's sort of a different there's a sort of a different aspect there. So I think that's where I'm going to wrap it up today. I appreciate you all listening. I'm going to do another video probably tomorrow. I have a lot to talk about, and I'm going to write out a much longer, more interesting podcast. So I hope you all join me tomorrow, and thank you guys for watching today. Bye.